I'm Howard Hale, and thanks for joining me for this edition of the Horseman's Corner. It's always interesting to do the program and interesting to have you folks along with us to learn more about horses. But anyway, I'll let today's guest, and we only have one guest on the program today, I'm going to let today's guest introduce himself and tell you where he's from. Well, Daniel, why don't you introduce yourself and tell folks where you live, will you?
Sure. My name is Daniel Dauphin. I'm in South Louisiana, although we travel all over. And I'm basically a guy who's good with horses. I teach horsemanship and do clinics, and we still ride a few outside horses and so forth. But that's just trying to help people with their horses and horses with their people.
Okay, let's start this out by telling me how you got involved with horses in the first place. What's your background?
Well, my dad was a banker, so I wasn't a ranch kid or anything like that. I just had the horse bug really bad, and I had a friend that I rode with his horses when we were young kids. By the time I was 16, I was always a pretty hard-working kid. I split firewood, and I had a garden I sold vegetables out of and all. And when I was 16, I went and bought my own first horse. And my parents didn't know anything about it at first, and kind of jumped head first into the puddle, I guess.
How'd you get to the point then where you were training horses for yourself and for the public and doing some clinics? What's the progression?
That horse was one I got from a horse trader, and he was a pretty bad one. As it turned out, he flipped over backwards and all kind of stuff. So I kind of had to figure out how to get myself out of that bind. And so I played with him for a couple of years. About the time I graduated high school and went to college, a neighbor of that ranch gave me the John Lyons VHS cassette tapes of him starting an Arabian filly and one of his colts to start. Not long after that, I'd gotten a job at a nearby halter horse barn in college and was cleaning stalls, and that led to a riding job. And I worked for a cutting horse trainer throughout most of college, and that was really where I got most of my learning. And I was pretty much just breaking colts for him, but I mean, he was running 75 to 100 colts a year underneath me, so I was getting plenty of experience there. So that's kind of where I really started to put things together a little bit anyway.
What's some of your thoughts about how you ought to progress with these colts when you start them?
Well, I think the main of it is teaching them about pressure and release, using good timing with that. I don't think people pay enough attention to timing. One of the things that is a little different about me and some other clinicians is that I do have a science background. So one of the nifty things I learned in college was the actual numbers behind timing, and it turns out that whenever a horse gives you a response, you actually have about a quarter of a second to give him the release in order for them to comprehend the cause and effect relationship there. If you're as late as about 3/4 of a second, their comprehension falls off 80%. So that's one of those things I'm really trying to get into a colt is the good timing where they're going to understand things and not become frustrated and confused. I think the other really important aspect of it is putting some pressure on them. I don't try to hide pressure from a colt. I don't try to tiptoe around them. I want them to see the world and the real world right away and learn to accept it and move on. And I kind of find doing things that way, usually after a couple weeks or a month, they're pretty darn broke. Whereas you can tiptoe around them, and 3 years later, they're still not trustworthy or dependable. So I think that's really the two biggest things of it is having good timing and not hiding things from your horse, being upfront. Just like a relationship with a person, you want to be honest and upfront and forthright, and that makes you trustworthy, and it makes for a good, consistent relationship. Whereas if you're hiding things or whatever, you come off shifty, and they're never going to really trust you, and with good reason. Not that different than dealing with people, really.
If your timing is good and you give that release as quick as you should, they come along pretty fast, don't they?
They do. I think that's one of the main things that people don't understand when you do watch a clinician give a demo or something like that, and it seems like the horse just comes along in 5 minutes. He's a different horse. What you really witnessed was a master of timing, and that makes things so much more clear for the horse. I think timing is probably the single most important thing that people should really go home and focus on and work on their horse with. If they get their timing to be better, the road just gets a whole lot smoother. It really does.
And that horse gives you some clues, doesn't he, that when you should be giving him that release? What are some of the clues that you might get from your horse that it's time to give him a release?
Well, everything I ask a horse to do, I try to have a pretty specific plan in my head. So the way I ride and the way I do groundwork, I'm generally trying to affect a specific foot. So, for example, if I'm going to do a left lead departure, which is a little more advanced, I'm specifically trying to ride that horse's right hind forward up underneath him and drive off with it. And, if you can do that and master the feel and the timing of that, then you can do a one-step lead departure very easily with just about any horse, and they won't be flinging their head up in the air and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm looking for specific things that I have in mind before I ask, and then when I see that specific thing, I release. And a lot of times when that begins, it doesn't look anything like what we want our finished product to look like, but we're on the road and we've got a horse that's learning the specifics, and they're motivated because we're being fair. I think a lot of times people expect to get too much too quickly, and that winds up taking them far longer to get anything done because they don't accept the little things early on.
So you kind of go slow in some respects to speed things up.
Absolutely. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. One of the things I keep trying to drill into my oldest son is that slow and perfect beats fast and sloppy every single time. Unfortunately, not all horse show judges agree with me on that, but I'm going to stay that course anyway.
And in reality, if you make a mistake, the horse is pretty forgiving, aren't they?
Typically, that's one of the... I have a little bit less of a romantic or anthropomorphic view on horses than a lot of people do. But even with my emotionless view of things, it gets more romantic to me as I see horses tolerating so much from people that do have poor timing and so forth. They really, they should be killing us and bucking us off a whole lot more often than what they do for the most part. So it's pretty awesome how forgiving and tolerant they are for the most part, for sure.
What about the people? Is it tough to get into their mind how important this timing is?
It can be. One of the things I've studied psychology a lot in the last few years, and so when I'm doing clinics and things, I really try to have a multi-pronged approach because different people do learn and they accept information in different ways. So you may say the same sentence, and 12 people in a clinic, they may hear that 4 different ways. And so you always have to be watching the people and kind of dealing with them differently. But if you can, kind of like working with a horse, if you can figure out that person's personality and get on their level and present the information to them in a way that is palatable to them, then success rate goes way, way up. Timing to me is a pretty black and white sort of thing. You can describe it to some people and sit there beside them. I use the word there, and so I may time right front foot break over point or something like that, and I'll say there with it. And there's really not a whole lot to understand there about when it's right and when it's wrong. You either are in time with it or you're not. Other people, you kind of have to put your hands on their hands and bump a rein with them and so forth and let them feel it. And then other people need to see it. Some people need it explained a different way. It just really all depends on the person. I don't have a one-size-fits-all sort of approach to anything.
Do people bring you many problem horses?
Well, I don't ride nearly as many outside horses anymore as I travel more and more, but I've ridden a whole bunch of them, yes, sir. That's predominantly what I've done through my career is riding young horses and problem horses. So I've dealt with just about every kind of behavior you can think of. And it really does help. Sometimes it's the exceptions that define the rule. So those kind of horses really do give you a better perspective on what's really going on with most of them when you kind of recognize what can go wrong with some of them. I guess if that makes sense. Kind of like a mechanic in a car. You ever see a mechanic that can just take a random engine and they know how to splice that together with the transmission that they happen to have and still make it all work and turn it into a race car or something? that's because they have a clear understanding of what the elements of the different parts are. And you only get that kind of understanding when you get the experience of.
Daniel, this is a good time for us to take a break, but let's do that. You folks stay with us. We're going to be back with a lot more from Daniel Dauphin in just a moment. You're listening to the Horseman's Corner.
Facebook Pages for Business has been a great tool for small businesses. However, let's face it, you have little control over your page and no control over their layout, their constant changes, and absolutely no guarantee it will always be free. Owning your own website offers these advantages and many more. If you have a Facebook page and would like to keep it, but also would like a website, we can help. 940-224-6315. HaleMultimedia.com.
Bunkhouse Trailer Sales has a large inventory of Big Bend trailers that handle the tough jobs like they should, with features that every cattleman can appreciate, but they're doing it from a new location that's at Steve's Truck and Equipment between Scottsbluff and Mitchell in the Nebraska Panhandle. If you can't stop by, give them a call at 308-623-9955 or check them out at bunkhousetrailersales.com. Bunkhousetrailersales.com for your next stock or horse trailer, including the tough, practical, cattleman-friendly Big Bend trailers. Welcome back to the Horseman's Corner. I'm Howard Hale, host of the program, and let's continue with the show. We're on the second part of today's program, and let's get right into it. Daniel, I know as a trainer you probably get in quite a few what you'd call, or some people would call, problem horses. Do those horses take more time than they're worth, or is there something you can learn from them?
I think problem horses are probably one of the very best ways to really learn about horses if you're a professional.
With the problem horses, is most of the problem usually with the owner?
It depends. I mean, I would say most of the problem horses are man-made, if that's what you mean. I don't think that's always the case. I've had 10 or 12 horses through my career that I don't think that anyone could have fixed or that anyone messed anything up with. I think they were more physiologically, something was literally not wired right in them. But I don't think that's the case most of the time. A lot of times people can be kind of unaware of the different connections that they're making. Like if we look at that behaviorally, what I'm really talking about is classical conditioning, Pavlov and his dogs and so forth. And if you know the history of that experiment, the dog salivating to the bell was a total accident. That wasn't something that was being set up. And yet they caused an unconscious response that was very powerful and uncontrollable. And a lot of times that's the same sort of thing that we set up in horses, and just as unaware as they were with that experiment. So some horses might have food aggression and different compulsive type behaviors. Could be bucking, could be lots of hard to catch. Person enters the paddock and the horse immediately starts running from them. A lot of times these things had some simple little thing that started them off, and they snowballed into a more complex, hopefully not dangerous behavior. But I definitely would say most problem horses are made, not born. But there are exceptions to that rule.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you see people making? Besides not having the correct timing, what else might be a problem?
I would say probably a lack of awareness and concentration on the horse is maybe the root of all of it. I think people are often maybe a little too concerned with themselves and what they're doing and not as observant with its effect as they might ought to be. One of the most common, like when I do groundwork with a horse, the very first thing that I'm trying to accomplish with groundwork is to get the horse's attention on me. I've noticed every single wreck I've ever had, the first thing that happens before the wreck happens is the horse's attention leaves me. Doesn't matter if a coyote jumped up, if a stallion took off toward a mare or whatever, I lose the animal's attention right before. I notice as I'm doing clinics and things that most people are not consistently aware of where their horse's attention is. And if you don't have the horse's attention, there's really not much point in asking them to turn left. You got to have that as step one. And so just getting people to be a little more aware of what the horse is doing, kind of breaking down the body language so that they have better information coming back to them as they are aware of the horse. Those are sort of the fundamental things that I concentrate on. I feel like that's of everything. If you don't have good data, you can't make a good decision. And if you're not even looking for the data, you don't have a prayer. So that's where we have to start with everything.
Okay, do you have any, you put on clinics, how big an area do you cover? Is it just mostly in Louisiana, or do you go all over the country?
We go all over the country. Yes, sir. The East Coast, and I haven't had any on the West Coast yet. We've had a couple that were supposed to happen over there, but invariably we've had an issue. COVID shut some of that down and so forth. So really getting the clinics going back has been a challenge. We didn't do any last year, and we've done a few this year, but we're still hitting. Well, we have still been hitting some problems. There are a few places that we've done a lot of clinics that were the municipalities took the downtime to do upgrades on the arena. So now we don't have an arena to ride in. We're waiting on them to fix things up. So hopefully next year is a little more typical for us, and we can get back on the road and get back to helping people and so forth. But the short answer is we'll go anywhere in the country. If it's too far to drive, then I'll fly and just borrow a horse when we get there or whatever. But if they'll have me, I'm happy to be there.
Okay, what about books and videos? Do you turn any of that type of thing out?
At this time, we only have one video out. It is on bits and bidding. That's probably what I'm best known for. One of the little niches that I occupy in college, I actually started out in engineering, so I've got a couple of years of engineering in my background, and that helps me to break down bits into the way that they actually function. So we have a 5.5 hour video on that called More Than a Bit Information. It is scientific in basis, and we do use physics and all to break things down and to dispel some of the myths and misinformation that's out there. But it is actually pretty easy to watch. I know you would think that would be a dry topic, but we take it all the way from anatomy and physiology, and there's a section on how to use your hands to be a little more productive and a little less offensive to the horse. And then it gets into snaffle bits, and we actually have a section before that is on setup, so things like width of the bit, surface area, metallurgy of the different types of bits and how they affect the horse. And then it gets into breaking down snaffles and the various mouthpieces, and then curb bits and the various mechanics of that. And it's really a very comprehensive, kind of the definitive encyclopedic type of information on the subject, basically what we were going for. I also brought in 9 collaborators from engineers to veterinarians who are equine dentists that were all a part of that video. There's about a half a dozen different new pieces of information that we introduce there that you're not going to find anywhere else. So the basic goal of it is to keep people away from gimmicks where you're not wasting your money on bits that really you should have never bought in the first place. I think every horseman I know has got a tech room wall with about 35 bridles that they never use hanging up in it, and they're using the same 3 all the time. So that's kind of what we were aiming at. It's also not sponsored at all, so there's no bias in it. Most of the information out there on bits is really more of an infomercial that was financed by a bit company. And maybe learning from the salesman is not the best place to get your information. So we wanted to be sure we were beyond reproach there. And the video has actually been accepted. It's in about 24 different universities around the United States in the equine sciences or equine studies programs. We've gotten some real good feedback and testimonials on it. So it's something we're pretty proud of. I know it's not a real exciting topic, but I think, like a lot of other things, it'll get to the root of a lot of problems and got a lot of bang for the buck. And I think it'll, if you really understand it, and what we're presenting in it, I think it'll change your relationship with your horse for the better and every horse you ride from here on.
When you talk about gimmicks, what are some of the gimmicks that you see out there?
Well, I'm always a little leery of harpooning someone else's product, but in the bit world, I would say that a whole lot of bits are what we might classify as fishing lures. So their main design criteria is to look shiny and cool on a wall in a tack store, and maybe not so much on the area of function. That's kind of what we're going to is we break everything down into various training stages of the horses, and it isn't discipline specific. So whether you're into spade bits or English horses or barrel racing or whatever, we cover all of that stuff. A lot of the gimmick stuff is bits that are unnecessarily severe or severe in ways that aren't going to be helpful. And, you know, there are other things, like we don't really get into gag bits in the video, but gag bits are far more mechanically complicated than most people realize. And because of the physics of the mechanics, they're the type of bit that does not give you a very good feel. So what you really have with a bit like that is an escalating curve of leverage, meaning what you feel in your hand is far more pressure in the horse's mouth than you realize. So it's a bit that it's very difficult to gauge the effect that you're having or to have empathy with, basically. So while I won't say that a gag bit, there's never a place or a use for it, I think they're way overused. And there are many other examples of bits like that there's a better way. You know, we have some other, Tom Thumb is one of those that gets picked on a lot. It's a bit that's got a few mechanical issues with it. A single-jointed mouthpiece in any curve bit has some issues with it because it functions so much differently than a snaffle. A snaffle is incapable mechanically of rotating. A leverage bit, by definition, does rotate. So when you form that point in a single-jointed mouthpiece and you rotate it, you drive it down into the tongue. And we break down a lot of the body language of horses to tell how you can tell whether they are appreciating a bit or rejecting it. That's kind of what I go by when I'm giving different information on bits. If 80% of the horses that I see with this type of bit in their mouth are showing me bad body language, we might not call that bit a gimmick, but it certainly wouldn't be the thing I would want to go spend my money on, hoping to get a bit that all my horses are going to like. So that's kind of how we look at it. I don't really isolate or point out any particular bit. I don't tell you to ride with any specific bit either. We just want to give you the breakdown and allow you to make your own decisions, as any good consumer should.
Daniel, we're up against time when we got to take a break, but let's do that, and you folks stay with us because we're going to have a lot more on bits with Daniel Dauphin in just a moment. You're listening to the Horseman's Corner. There's only one reason to have a website or a Facebook page for your business, and that's to let people know you are in business and to bring people to your business, make them familiar with it on a basis that makes them want to work with you and do business with you. If that website or Facebook page doesn't get found, doesn't do you a darn bit of good. AgSearch.us is our newest search engine for agriculture that will make that agricultural website or Facebook page a lot easier to find. Bring more people to your doorstep with the idea that they may be willing to do business with you. That's AgSearch.us. That's our newest website, and it's advertised on radio stations from Texas to Montana. AgSearch.us. That's easy to remember, AgSearch.us. So it'll be easy to find. AgSearch.us. Visit today. Welcome back to the Horseman's Corner. We're on the second half of today's program, and let's continue with Daniel Dauphin. That bit, then, is a good part of the line of communication that you have with the horse, but there's nothing really magic about any bit, is there?
No, sir. There's no bit that will overcome hands. So good hands are going to make a lot of bits work well, and poor hands are going to make no bits work well. And to be honest, my main goal with a horse, say one of my personal horses that I'm not concerned with showing, they're really pretty much bridleless by the time I get done with them. So the bit is there to help with communication, but your body and your legs and your seat aids are really, that's where it's at. The bit is just there to help out with some other aspects of it. And I like to think of the head as the hood ornament. I'm always more concerned with the feet whenever we're riding. By the time we get the feet right, if we haven't too much. The head tends to take care of itself for the most part. We just need a few little finishing touches. It's one of the things we talk about in the video that people are just way too concerned with getting into their horse's face, and they kind of put the cart before the horse in that aspect, wind up causing themselves a lot more problems. So we try to lay out the case for that. If you can't trot a perfect circle on a horse, you have no business trying to trot a perfect circle with lateral flexion involved. It just doesn't make any sense. But people go down that road all the time. I've never understood it.
Yeah, this is interesting. You talking about bits, because that can sure be important, and that bit has to be comfortable for the horse, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's really what we're trying to discuss in the video, is making the horse as comfortable as possible. A lot of times people don't realize that the bit that they're using or the way that they're using it is more in their way than on their side. If we have a horse that's not comfortable, then basically every time you pick up on a rein, you've distracted him. And then you're trying to get him to follow you. Remember that attention thing we talked about earlier. So they really have to be comfortable with the bit. I view that as a very intimate thing. It's kind of like your underwear. It's got to fit right, and it's got to be comfortable, or every step you take is going to be a pain. And so we need to have that kind of relationship with the bit for the horse, or every single time we ask him for something through those reins, distraction and pain is the first message that he gets. Predictably, that's not going to go very well.
How about some of the other tack or some of the other things that we use on a horse? For example, how important is there's probably a lot of misconception out there about saddle fit, for one thing, but what about pads and saddles? What do you they're important too, aren't they?
For sure. I'm a big fan of keeping things as simple as I can. I have for most of my career been a big fan of the 1-inch thick wool felt pads. I've been using those things for years. They're not real expensive. They're not real fancy, but I've never put white marks on a horse's back. So I like those a lot. Saddle fit, we tend in the horse world to sort of have these buzzwords and fads that come around, and biomechanics was one not long ago, and the natural foot stuff was before that, and now we seem to be in the saddle fit. I don't believe that there is a perfect saddle fit for any horse. I think that there is a level of good enough, but a horse's back is a dynamic thing. It moves different ways. If you watched one walk from like a drone shot above, you would see that those shoulders move, the hips move. It's not a stationary thing, and any saddle tree is. So we're just looking for a saddle that fits well enough and spreads out pressure over surface area. Once you accomplish that and you don't have any big pressure points, then I think you're good enough. So, like, I have about 6 saddles that I ride with, and those saddles fit types of horses. So, like I have a saddle that fits a narrow, long back horse pretty well. I have another saddle that fits a shorter back, stockier type horse pretty well. And that's kind of how I view things. I'm looking for types, and I know this saddle fits this type well. And once you're kind of in that category of good enough, like I said, I've never put gall spots on withers or any of those sorts of things. I do think if you are in a situation where you have dry spots under your saddle pad and all, that's definitely something that you need to get on top of and rectify. But I don't know that every horse requires a full custom saddle, And again, that horse is going to have a different shape back in the summer when he's fat than in the winter when he's skinny. So I think we can go a little too far down that road, but we definitely do need to be paying attention and making sure that we're not causing problems with our saddle.
How do you go about your education? Because this is something that I'm assuming you're constantly learning.
Oh yes, sir. There's always new information out there. I do follow a lot of the scientific studies, like with the bit video. I actually spent about 6 months doing hard research on various medical studies. Well, I kind of started on studies on horses, and when I had questions I couldn't find answers to, I expanded to other animals and finally even to people. But there's just a lot of good information out there. I saw that one of your previous guests was Dr. Steve Peters. The neuroscience of stuff is probably the area that I'm most curious about and looking into currently, and that's really polyvagal nerve theory, and all of that is pretty exciting stuff. I know it's not mainstream yet, maybe a little more technical than a lot of people want to get, but if you're a professional, I don't think you should be shying away from technical. And if you're presenting people to information to other people, I think you should have as much information understood in your corner as possible. So, excuse me, I have a cold right now. I apologize if I messed up the audio there.
Oh, that's no problem, because I can sure edit. That's one of the I do some editing. What else would you like to add about horses and horsemanship that I haven't been perceptive enough to ask you about?
I don't know. I would say that probably one of the best favors that you could do yourself is to get some good help. They say that experience is the best teacher, and I don't know that that's true. I think experience is the most expensive teacher out there, because it gives you the test first and the lesson afterwards. So if you can lease someone else's experience, that's probably a much faster and less painful track to a good outcome. So getting good help, I think, is a pretty big part of advancing your horsemanship. I think at the end of the day, too, the horse is ultimately going to be the best teacher that you have. I mean, I've read tons of books in various subjects, from cutting to dressage and ray hunt and endurances and all of that stuff. And then I spent about 6 years apprenticing under other trainers, and I really would have to say that far and away I've learned more from the horse than I have from any other source. So don't fear or don't shy away from spending that time with your horse, or with as many horses as you possibly can. I think there are a lot of people that are kind of looking for a shortcut, and there's really no way to excellence other than doing the work. And so if you can find a good human mentor, I think they'll help you and point you in the right direction. But ultimately, your horse is the real expert. So they're the ones that you're going to learn more from. So spend the time, roll up your sleeves, and get in the pen with one.
And there's no one-size-fits-all with these horses, is there?
For sure. I mean, you had asked me about the problem horses. I mean, that's kind of what that teaches you, is horses are different from one another. One of the things that's been a blessing for me is I've worked with about every breed of horse you can imagine, and you sort of start to see the commonalities between them, even the various bloodlines within breeds. Like, I'm more familiar with cutting horses than anything else. There are certain bloodlines in cutting horses that are going to be very trainable. There are certain bloodlines that are going to be very bronky and difficult. And so you start to recognize just how different horses can be, and how much you need to customize that approach to get through to this one or to get through to that one. One of the things I hear clinicians talking about a lot is well, some of them anyway, kind of give a rainbows and unicorns sort of a approach to things, about everything being wonderful and gentle. And I've always taken a little bit of exception to that. An example I use all the time is, if we took 10 horses that didn't know each other and we put them in an arena with one bucket of feed, and we left and came back the next day, those horses would not have the same amount of hair on them that they had when we dropped them off. And some of them are going to be more aggressive and assertive. Some of them are going to be at the lower end of that pecking order and backing off. And we kind of have to handle things the same way. Some horses we need to be pretty darn firm with, and other horses we have to be very, very sensitive with. So I try to do everything with a dose of reality, even though sometimes that reality isn't as politically correct as we might want it to be. So, but reality is reality. So.
Okay, how do people find you?
Probably the easiest way to get in touch with me is through our website, DauphinHorsemanship.com, and it's Dauphin, like Dauphin Island in Alabama. We've also got a Facebook page for Dauphin horsemanship, and then I have a Facebook group called Bits, Spurs, and Good Sense, and that's probably where I do more question and answer kind of stuff than anything else. And then we have Instagram, YouTube, and most of the social media outlets.
Well, Daniel, it's time for us to take our last break of the day. Let's get that done and then come back and finish up today's Horseman's Corner in just a moment. Stay with us, folks. You're listening to the Horseman's Corner. Bunkhouse Trailer Sales has a large inventory of Big Bend trailers that handle the tough jobs like they should, with features that every cattleman can appreciate, but they're doing it from a new location that's at Steve's Truck and Equipment between Scottsbluff and Mitchell in the Nebraska Panhandle. If you can't stop by, give them a call at 308-623-9955 or check them out at bunkhousetrailersales.com. Bunkhousetrailersales.com for your next stock or horse trailer, including the tough, practical, cattleman-friendly Big Bend trailers.
Are you in business? If so, you probably have a Facebook page. Facebook has done a lot of good for small businesses, but one thing is certain. Facebook is constantly changing, and there's no guarantee it will always be there. You don't own it. You can fix that by owning your own website. If you'd like to learn more, give us a call, 940-224-6315, or visit halemultimedia.com and click on Facebook Special.
Welcome back. Good to have you with us here on the last segment of today's Horseman's Corner. It's always good to have you folks along with us on the program, and let's continue with Louisiana horseman Daniel Dauphin. You brought up something that's kind of interesting. You say that people need to probably need to find a good person to work with, but how do they know that person that they're working with knows what they're talking about?
That's certainly a challenge. We seem to be in a time when there's about 8 million clinicians out there. One of the things that I would advise you to look for is someone that has actual experience. And when I say experience, I'm probably judging that more in decades rather than a year or 2 or 6 months through some certification program or whatever. It takes a long, long time to get information together on this stuff. I do see there are people out there that are teaching that are probably a lot greener than they really should be. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, I guess. So I would definitely look for someone that's experienced. Maybe gray hairs would be a good thing, something along those lines. Not bad. I would say watch their horses. Again, the horse is the ultimate test and the ultimate teacher. So if I'm going to learn from someone, I darn sure want to watch them work a horse, and I want to be sure that the outcome they're getting with their horse is an outcome that I would be happy with. People have different styles and so forth, and so if you're following someone whose style is very different from what you actually want in the end, you probably have an uphill battle. And today with the technology that we have, you don't have to have a mentor in your own backyard anymore. I mean, we do video consults where you can send me like a 20-minute clip, and I can put it through a program where I can draw on it, voice over, point out this and point out that, stop the video, slow it down, back it up, and all that kind of stuff. So you have a lot more access to people that might not be close to you than you would have 20 years ago. So I think that's what I would advise people. Don't necessarily settle for what's in your backyard, and definitely watch the people that you are learning from work a horse and make sure that the results they're getting are the same results that you want to get.
And there are, I guess, there's some clinicians out there that really are presenting I'd call it a cookie cutter approach. And I don't know that there is a cookie cutter approach. There isn't a one size fits all, or there's, is that a fair assessment?
It is. And I do understand that approach. I mean, at the end of the day, those people are teaching people, not horses, and they're trying to break the information down and organize it so that it is easy for people to understand. And a lot of people are doing that and with great success. I tend to find that because they have simplified that approach so much to make it easily organized, there are a lot of things that they have to leave out. And my approach with things, as you've noticed through this interview, I don't tend to be very good at being succinct. I'm a little longer-winded and a little more comprehensive about those things than most people. So I don't have a simple or cookie-cutter an approach, but I think the complexity is necessary because all horses are different and they all are going to require to be handled different. So there are things that they all have in common, like timing is universal, but tab A into slot B is going to be a very limiting approach in the world of horses. There's just not going to be very many you're going to get along with well at that sort of approach, even though it's easier for you. So it might be a good place to start, but you're going to be limited by it. So maybe before long you need to branch out from that and get into something a little more depth and a little more complexity, because that just is the reality of it. It's not super simple. Or well, the way I like to describe it is every little part of it is simple, but it's 4,000 simple things. So.
And do sometimes people not give the horse enough time to process what they're trying to get across to them?
For sure. One of the things I mentioned, Dr. Peters earlier, and it's a pretty well-known deal now about horse lick and chewing correlating with the dopamine release. Well, a lot of times it takes 20 seconds before a horse will lick and chew. And so those are the real times when the horse is actually actively learning, not so much when we were trotting the circle or doing the spin or whatever came before it. So I definitely find that more novice horse people tend to be too busy. And if you'll notice, again, watching that person whose horses you want your horse to turn out like, a lot of times when you watch a very skilled and experienced horseman, it doesn't really look like they're doing much. Well, that's not an accident or a magic trick. They aren't doing much, because if you do too much, then the horse can't figure it out. So when they stopped and checked the test message on their phone, that might have been the most important part of the whole ride, to let that horse stop and soak on what just happened. So that would be one thing I would definitely advise people to think more about or recognize more, that sometimes the time when you're doing nothing is the most important time of the whole ride.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, it's one of the things sometimes people don't pay enough attention to their horse.
Well, yes, sir. When I say that, I'm more talking about reading the horse's body language, but seeing the bigger pattern requires a lot of time. So the way I would say most people are dealing with their horse is that they are paying attention to them in increments, and they are either really paying attention to them in a microscopic way, or then they're back on themselves. And what I would advise you to do more, what experience gives you the benefit of, is having more of the 30,000-foot approach. And then you start to see the bigger patterns. And I think the more experienced people get, the more they're focusing on the bigger pattern rather than the little thing that happened right now. So for instance, you might think that 8 repetitions of this circle exercise is what's going to really teach your horse. And in reality, 2 repetitions of it with a really good dopamine release in the middle is far more effective. So that would be how I would say pay attention to your horse, kind of in the 30,000-foot view rather than in the staring too much at the tree and you miss the forest.
Well, we've run out of time. This has been a lot of fun. This has been interesting, and I'd like to give you a call back sometime and get more into this deal with the bits, because that really sounds interesting to me.
Well, thank you. Yes, sir. We can talk about bits all day. That's no problem. In fact, when I say the video is 5.5 hours, we actually had to edit judiciously obviously, to get it down to that time frame, it could have been 10 hours. but anyway, at some point you have to say enough. So I'd be happy to do that.
Louisiana horseman Daniel Dauphin, very interesting information that he has as far as bits are concerned particularly. Well, it was good to have Daniel Dauphin with us today here on the Horseman's Corner. Thanks for joining us for today's edition of the Horseman's Corner. Always great to have you folks along with us on the program. It's time to close it out. We've run out of time. I'm Howard Hale, host of the show, and I'll say goodbye. May God bless. See you next week, same time, same place.